So good evening, everyone. My name is Gail Kurtzman, and I am the Director of Programs and Events at Beth Tikvah Synagogue. On behalf of the Adult Education Committee, I'd like to welcome award-winning author and our member, Rona Arato, tonight. Rona, as I mentioned, is a long-standing member of Beth Tikvah, and she is an author of over 20 children's books. Her book, The Last Train, A Holocaust Story, is the winner of numerous awards, including the Norma Fleck Award as the best Canadian children's nonfiction book of 2014. The book is based on her husband's testimony of his liberation from the Farlesleben train, and tonight's presentation is a continuation of that story. So I will now hand it over to Rona.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for coming. It's it's wonderful to see so many people. I don't see everyone, but it's wonderful to have you all here. Should I start the share screen? Let me see.
Sure.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. I'm just going to start, but with a little bit of background. Many of you know the story, but I just want to review it. My late husband, Paul, was deported from Hungary in April of 1944. With his mother and brother, and they were first sent to a farm in Austria to do work as slave laborers, and then after the harvest were sent to Bergen Belsen. On April 9th, 1945, they were put on a train with 2,500 prisoners from Bergen Belsen, and it was one of 3 trains that left Bergen Belsen that day. The idea, as far as we know, is that these trains were supposed to go to Theresienstadt. One train actually got to Theresienstadt. A 3rd train meandered through Germany. It was East Germany because that's where Bergen Belsen was, going from one railroad track to another, trying to avoid the advancing Allies. The train that Paul was on also meandered for 5 days. The engineers were told to drive the train onto a bridge, which was then going to be blown up. The idea was to kill everybody on the train. For some reason, the engineers didn't think this was such a great idea. So instead of taking the train onto the bridge, they stopped the train outside a town near Magdeburg, a town called Farlesleben. Okay, and let me just, okay. All right, on April 13th, 1945, the train was liberated by American soldiers from the 30th Infantry Division of the 9th Army. And that's the story I'm going to tell you today. The story about the liberation and about what has happened since, okay? It's a story with many, many aspects, many wonderful coincidences, and some really amazing happenings. So this is a picture of the monument that was erected 2 years ago in April of 2020 at the site of the liberation. The original ceremony was supposed to be on April 13th, 2020 as part of Liberation 75. Obviously, unfortunately, it had to be canceled at that time because of the COVID epidemic, and it was rescheduled for this year. Okay, but now I'm going to go back to the story of the liberation. So on April 13th, 1945, 3 weeks before the end of World War II in Europe, 2 U.S. Army tank commanders, Carl Walsh and George Gross, were summoned by their major to investigate a strange train transport that was halted at a railroad siding deep in the heart of Nazi Germany. These 2 soldiers were part of the 30th Infantry Division of the U.S. 9th Army, a division that was nicknamed and to this day is called Old Hickory in honor of Andrew Jackson. The division is based in Raleigh, North Carolina. Okay, let me just close this. So I want to talk a little bit about the 30th Infantry because they were quite an amazing division. In 1944, units of theirs stormed the Normandy beaches following the D-Day invasion. Later that year, they fought in the Battle of the Bulge. They liberated a town, a southern province of Limburg in the Netherlands in September 1944. And there are 8,288 American graves in Margraten Cemetery near that town, in that province. And each grave has been adopted by a family who place flowers from time to time on the grave. And there's a waiting list to become adopted parents of these graves. A group from the town attended the ceremony in Farlesleben to honor the soldiers who liberated their town. And it was a wonderful opportunity for us to meet them and get to know them. Okay. Okay, so as the infantry, the 30th Infantry, moved eastward into Germany, before it got to this train, it liberated Weferlingen, a subcamp of the Buchenwald concentration camp, on April 12th, 1945. And then the following day, April 13th, members of the 30th encountered about 200 starving and ill Jewish concentration camp prisoners who had escaped from a transport nearby. The American soldiers then sent 2 tanks, the ones I talked about with Carl Walsh and George Gross, to find the train with the remaining inmates. And their after-action report indicated that there were 12 German military guards, including the tank commander, who gave up without a fight when they saw our tanks. This is what they wrote. There are 2,500 pitiable, oppressed people from all over Europe, starved, beaten, ill, some dying, but all of whom were wildly happy and grateful to their liberators. Okay, so after the war, when they came home, George Gross, who had taken pictures at the time of the liberation, put together his memories of that day with the pictures that he had taken. Okay. Now, this is an iconic photo. There was a 3rd soldier who came out of the forest in a Jeep. I remember Paul saying, we kept hearing about the 2 soldiers on the tanks, but Paul kept saying, I remember a Jeep. I'm sure there was a Jeep. Well, there was, and this was Major Clarence Benjamin, who came with the 2 tanks to help liberate the train. And Major Benjamin took this marvelous, iconic picture. These people, the instant of the train was liberated, these people first realized they had been liberated. Many of those close to the train are not yet aware of their liberation. And George says his tank is just behind the camera. And this picture has become very iconic. On a list that I received of the 100 most important Jewish pictures ever taken, this one was number 3. Number 1 was David Ben-Gurion signing the Israeli Declaration of Independence. Number 2 was that wonderful picture of Albert Einstein with his tongue out. And this one was number 3. It's an amazing picture. Okay, this is another view of the train. People now have been liberated. The soldiers, of course, the first few cars were passenger cars where once the German guards had run off, the people were able to get out on their own, and they immediately started foraging for food. The other cars, about 45 of them, were box cars that had to be opened by the soldiers. And I remember Frank Towers telling us when we went to a reunion, I mean, you can imagine the smell and what they saw when they opened those box cars, people huddled together, half alive, half dead. Some people had died in the cars. Others, like Paul's mother, had to be carried off. They were so sick. Okay, this is a shot of others on the train. The women and children in this and the following picture demonstrate, and I don't know what he said, a view from the turret statement that the train contained only finished men. George said, I'm moved still by all those smiles, particularly the ones on the thin little girl at the front left. Okay, this is Gina Rappaport, and I'm going to get back to her a little later in the presentation. She was a translator. She spoke excellent English, and she was the one who told the soldiers who was on the train, how they got there, and what had happened to them. Picture of George Gross and Carol Walsh, the two comrades who depended on each other in the war. They were friends for the rest of their lives. Okay, so on the viewer's right is, on the viewer's left is George Gross, viewer's right, Carol Walsh. And it was Carol who told this story to a high school teacher, Matt Rizal. Okay, this is history teacher Matt Rizal, history teacher in Hudson Falls, New York. He was doing interviews with World War II veterans in the town of Hudson Falls as a history project, a living history project with his students. And when he did when he interviewed Carl Walsh, Carl's daughter Elizabeth, at the end of the interview said, Dad, you left something out. You forgot to tell Mr. Roselle about the train that you and George found in the forest in Germany. And so Carl Walsh launched into the story of how he and his tank mates and this Major Benjamin came out of the forest and encountered this train with 2,500 Holocaust survivors from Bergen Belsen. So Matt put the story on his website, the high school website. And as he tells it, there was not much traffic in the beginning, but a few months later, he got an email from a woman in Australia who said, I saw your story, and that was the moment of my liberation, and I fell out of my chair. And then more survivors started contacting Matt. So he put them in touch with Frank Towers, who was the president of the 30th Infantry Division. They have an organization, as many military units do. And Frank invited these survivors to come to their next reunion to meet the soldiers who had saved their lives. Now, I just want to talk for a minute about Matt. Matt, since this was in, I think, 2008 or 2007, I don't remember the exact year. We just found out about it in 2009. Since this time, Matt has retired as a history teacher after 30 years. He is now a fellow at the National Memorial Holocaust Museum in Washington. He has written several books. He's dedicating his life to the story, not just the story of the train, but also to the story of the soldiers, the veterans, and other World War II stories. And at the end of the presentation, I have a series, I have some websites on there. I have his website, you can go look him up. It not only changed his life, it changed the lives of many of us who were involved. Okay. All right, so there are many coincidences in this story. My son Daniel was, this was in 2009, was reading something on the internet, and he happened to click on the word Holocaust, and up came the story about Matt and the reunion, the first reunion that the survivors went to in the North Carolina, in Charleston, where they met some of the soldiers, and there was an Associated Press photographer there, and it was written up. The story got on the internet, and when Daniel saw it, he immediately recognized it as the train that Paul had been on, Paul and his family. He sent me a link to the article. He said, Mom, read it and then tell Dad, because it was very hard for Paul, like so many survivors, to even go back to some of the reminiscences and the stories of those days. So I read the story. I went, okay, this has got to be the train Paul was on. I knew he'd been liberated on April 13th, 1945. and out of a train from Bergen Belsen in Farlesleben. There couldn't have been two. I called Paul in to read the article. He did. He said, yeah, that's it. That's where I was. But he didn't want to visit it. He didn't want to talk to Matt. He didn't want to go back. So I waited a while. I tried to convince him. Then I contacted Matt, who put me in touch with Frank Towers. And his email said, Paul, meet your liberator. And at that point, we connected with Frank Towers and we went to a reunion of the 30th in Charleston, South Carolina, where we met Matt, and we met some of the other soldiers, Frank and a few of the other soldiers, and several other survivors. It was at that meeting that Matt announced he was planning a 3-day symposium at the Hudson Falls High School, where he would invite the survivors and the soldiers. And we immediately agreed to go. Now, another coincidence, Paul was an industrial designer, and for over 20 years, he had worked with Frank and Leslie Mizels. They had a mold making shop, which is still in existence, being run by Tommy, their nephew, where they made the prototypes, the molds for the products that Paul made. You know, so they worked together. One day they were sitting in the shop having coffee, and Paul said, hey guys, you know, you were from, and I forget the name of their town, it's near Debrecen, which was very near Kartsog, the town that Paul was from. Where were you during the war? And they discovered they had all been on this train together. So when we came back from the Charleston reunion, we told Leslie about it, and he and his wife Eva attended the symposium in Hudson Falls. I just want you to look. This was the program for the symposium. This picture was drawn by one of the survivors. After the train was liberated, the survivors were taken to Hillersleben, a nearby town, city, where there had been a military base for the, I believe it was for the SS or the Luftwaffe, and I'm not sure, I think it was the SS. And there was a hospital there and there were dormitories. So it was a good place to take the survivors. Many people ended up in the hospital, including Paul's mother, who was so sick with typhus that she had to be carried off the train, and she was put in the hospital. One of the survivors who was in the hospital while he was there drew this picture from his own memory. And this is his memory of the tanks, the train, and you can see the people who are just been liberated. And there's a picture down here of Carl Walsh and George Gross, and one of the pictures from the train. Okay, so these are the soldiers and survivors. You can see the date of the symposium, September 22nd to 26th, 2009 in Hudson Falls. The back row are the soldiers, and this is Matt Rizal on the far right, and these are the soldiers who were there. Francis Curry, standing next to Matt Rizal, is was one of the few surviving Congressional Medal of Honor winners from World War II. He was from the 30th, and his story is amazing, but I'm not going to go into it here. These were the survivors who attended the symposium. This is Paul on the lower right, as you're looking at the picture. Okay, Leslie Mizels, and this was Elizabeth Seaman, who was also a child survivor. Leslie was older. I think he was about 18 at the time. And one of the things that was so amazing to me at this reunion was sitting and listening to Paul, who was 6.5 years old at the time of liberation, compare notes with some of the older survivors and how accurate his memory was about everything that had happened at that time on that day. Okay. I love this picture. When we walked into the first night of the symposium, there was a reception in the hotel where we were staying. And when we walked into the reception, we saw Matt, whom we had already met, but we hadn't met Carl Walsh. And we walked up to Matt. He introduced Paul to Carl. And Carl Carol, I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing it right, Carol Walsh. Paul said, give me a hug, you saved my life. There was an Associated Press photographer there who snapped this picture, and it went out on the wire service. It was in the paper, and I just love it. I think this blue shirt in the back is Matt standing there. Okay, now I'm going to fast forward 65 years. We went to the symposium. Many friendships were made. We became very close with the Walsh family. We've stayed in touch all these years. But you know, we did attend one more reunion in Nashville. And after that, Paul became ill. We did not attend any other reunions. And okay, now I'm going to fast forward 65 years. What happened is we heard from a man. Okay, I'm just going to go forward. This is Ron Cholet. Ron is from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam. He is a historian, and he happened to buy on eBay a letter. Remember, I spoke about Gina Rappaport, the woman who was the translator. Well, she wrote a letter to George Gross after the war, thanking him for saving their lives and then telling him the story of everything that had happened to her. And that letter never got mailed. Somehow it ended up in a book in an apartment in New York where Gina had stayed after the war. Whoever found that book put the letter up for sale on eBay, and Ron bought the letter. Now, unfortunately, he sent me a recording of his speech that he gave at in Farlesleben, but we just couldn't get it to work. So I'm going to put the, at the end, I've got a sheet with various websites, and one of them is Ron's website where you can access that speech. I was going to play it for you, but we can't get it to play. So Ron read the letter, and he contacted, he looked up Farlesleben, a train near Farlesleben. That connected him to Matt Rosell, whom he contacted. Matt put him in touch with Frank Towers, and he heard the whole story. And then he decided there really should be some kind of a monument at the site of the train, something. I wonder if the students, if the teachers in Farlesleben know what happened there. This is such an amazing story. So I'm going to go back now. So he contacted the high school teacher in Farlesleben, and together they formed the Committee of the Stranded Train. This is the plaque that has been erected at the site. Obviously, you can't read it, and it's in German and English, with the pictures from the Day of Liberation. But Ron did manage to get together, and this is the teacher here, and these three students, and they formed a committee, and together they raised the money, and they got the monument erected. I'm just going back here. This was just a picture I just took. I think Sharon and Elizabeth are on tonight, I hope. This, when we got to the site, this Jeep was there representing the Jeep that Major Benjamin was on, and it still runs. I didn't get to ride in it, but some people got to take it down to the side of the train, and this is one of the soldiers who came to the reunion. Okay. All right, this is Ron Cholet giving a speech. And again, the teacher and her students who put this whole thing together. Okay, this is the picture of the monument. This is the picture of some of us walking down to the site where the train was actually liberated, okay? And I have to tell you that walking down there and standing at the site where the train was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. It was just, you know, you talk about goosebump moments, and this was a real goosebump moment because we were there. These are survivors, liberators, and people from the train. Okay. All right. Now, the 30th Infantry is the reserve unit, sent a contingent of 5 soldiers from the train to represent the 30th at this liberation ceremony. And here they are. I'll show you more pictures in a minute. So this is Colonel Wes Morrison speaking at the monument. And this is Private First Class Ben welcoming everyone in Hebrew. And we got to Farlesleben, and I'll just tell you a little bit about it. When we got there, the ceremony was August 30th. I met Sharon and her husband Ron and Elizabeth in Berlin 5 days earlier. And we went through Berlin. It was amazing. We went to Potsdam, to the site of the Big Three conference where Stalin, Churchill, and Truman had met. And we went through the chalet where the conference was, and heard the whole story about the conference. And it was quite amazing. And then we got to Magdeburg, and we met Ron, and we met some of the soldiers and other survivors, and people from the town in Holland that were liberated by the 30th were there, as I had said before, to honor the soldiers who had liberated their town. We all met for dinner the first night. We met at an Italian restaurant outdoors, and everybody we couldn't stop talking. The stories flowed. It was the most incredible evening. The next day, we went to the site of the liberation. And as I say, we first, when we entered, I'm going to go back a little bit. We first came walk into the courtyard here where you had the Jeep. And then we went into the building where there were about, I think, 12 of us spoke. And the speeches are all on Ron Chalet's website, which I will give you, and I'm not going to bore you now by going through all the speeches, including mine. My speech, basically, I talked about how I first met Paul, how I really didn't know a lot about the Holocaust growing up. I went and spent a year in Israel, backpacked through Europe for 3 months, came home, and through a mutual friend that I had met in Israel, met Paul. And when I was showing him my pictures of Europe, and I showed him a picture of the Anne Frank house, he said, "Oh yeah, we were in the same camp." And I went, "Oh my gosh, he doesn't mean summer camp like the camps I went to." And that's when I like to say that the Holocaust entered my life on a very personal level. Obviously, when we got married, I learned more about it. I learned his story. He didn't really want to share it with the kids. He never told anyone. People knew him for 30 years, did not know he was a Holocaust survivor. He didn't talk about it. On the outside, he was very fun-loving, very happy-go-lucky. In fact, when I was in Israel 4 or 5 years ago with Gloria Pincus, Gloria and I were on a tour, and when we were in Jerusalem, we had dinner with Rabbi Fader, and I gave him a copy of The Last Train. And I received a beautiful letter from him after he read it, saying, "It's so hard to believe that this wonderful man that I knew as a father, a husband, a member of Beth Tikvah, an outgoing, fun-loving person, had gone through all of this." So, the whole story was really amazing. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the speeches, but unfortunately, as I say, I can't play the video of Ron's speech, but you'll be able to read it. Ron's speech talks about how he found that letter on eBay and from Gina Rappaport, and through it he contacted Matt and then Frank Towers and got in touch with the teacher and the students to organize this reunion and the monument in Farlesleben. Okay. show you this. This young woman, Johanna, when the ceremony was canceled on April 13th, 2020, Johanna went down to the monument and put flowers there. And that story was in the local paper, and it was sent to us. And I had the pleasure of meeting Johanna and sitting next to her the last night in Magdeburg at the closing dinner. The last night, lovely young woman. All of these students are phenomenal. And the teacher, and I apologize, I don't have their names here. She's retiring, and she was worried that nobody would be interested enough to carry forward this project. There is a museum at the site called the Museum of the Stranded Train with a wonderful exhibit. And when they first erected organized the exhibit, it was supposed to be a traveling exhibit, but they've since decided to keep it as a permanent exhibit in the museum. And the teacher, she was worried that nobody would take it over. Ron was worried that nobody would take it over. But I received an email recently saying that they are going to keep the exhibit, keep the monument alive, and there will be people who will be tending it, and this story will survive so that future generations, young people, know what happened in their town and how it has been taken care of and continues to be. Okay, so here we are walking down to the train tracks, and this is a picture of the monument and the colonel speaking at the monument. Oh, and so I sat next to Ben, and he was telling us the story. Now, he had just joined this unit. He's a freshman at university. The National Guard in the States is a part-time. They go through basic training like everybody else, but then they go, I think, one weekend every 5 weeks, for 1 week for, their training or what, on duty. They can be called up in national emergencies, and they are called up in national emergencies. But if there's no emergency, they work and they go to school and they lead their lives. Okay, so when Ben was called into his commandant's office, he got very, very nervous. He told me, he said, I'd only been in it a few weeks and I couldn't imagine why he's calling me in. What did I do wrong? Was I going to be court-martialed? Were they going to kick me out? And he got into the commandant's office, and the colonel or the commander said to him, hey, Ben, you're in university. Can you take a few weeks off? Are you able to travel? And Ben said, well, I don't know why. I mean, my school is very important to me. And the commander said, well, we'd like you to go to Germany. Now, this is a 19-year-old kid who'd never been out of North Carolina. I'm not sure he'd ever been out of Raleigh. And he said, Germany? Well, it turns out he was the only Jewish soldier in this particular unit, and they really wanted to have one Jewish soldier there. So Ben got the golden ticket, and he got to come to Germany, and he was just thrilled. And they were going from here, they were going on to Belgium to visit other sites that the 30th had liberated. And I believe, I can't remember where else they were going. Oh, they were going to Holland as well, to the Netherlands. So this was very exciting for him. Okay, here's a few of us at the Liberation. This is Elizabeth Seaman, this is me taking the picture. I guess Sharon took the picture of me taking the picture. This woman, Miriam, is an amazing woman. She is a survivor. She was a child survivor. She lives in Israel. She was there with some of her kids, her grandkids. They had a whole gang there. And she told us that she has 20 grandchildren and 40 great-grandchildren. And the survivors call their children and grandchildren their revenge. Paul always referred to our kids as his revenge. We survived, and now look, we have another generation and a generation after that. And Miriam is certainly a wonderful example of that. Okay, now they had asked we didn't unfortunately have any of the soldiers. They have all passed away, but we had the children of some of the children of the soldiers, and they were asked to line up to shake hands with the survivors and with the people who had been liberated and with the families of the survivors. So here we are shaking hands, lining up to shake hands with the children of the soldiers who liberated the train and the towns along the way. Oh, that's a picture. That's Sharon, Carl Walsh's daughter. These two gentlemen are from the Netherlands, and they have a, I don't know if I can show it to you, but it'll come up on the camera. The night of the last dinner, this gentleman called me and myself and Judy Mizels, and he had also already spoken to Sharon, Elizabeth, a few other people, and gave us, I don't know if you can see it, these are the pins of the organization that tends the graves. And he wanted us to have these pins so that we are now kind of honorary members of their organization. It was really quite amazing. The conversations that took place, I can't begin to repeat them to tell you the stories we heard from the children of the soldiers. One man that I was sitting across from, and I'm so bad with names, I haven't, was telling us a story of his father who was a medic, and he and his partner, they were in one of the battles, and they were survivors. They in a cabin they had to go up a hill to try to get to these people who they'd been, you know, the area had been bombed, and they wanted to rescue these other soldiers, and they went up the hill, and as they got to the cabin, he said a plane, you know, the German planes that they were strafing. You've heard stories how they used to fly over and strafe the civilians and strafe the soldiers. This plane flew over, and there was no place for them to hide. They were just up against the wall of this cabin, and they looked at each other and said, I guess this is it. We're done for. There's nothing we can do. They're going to shoot us. And the plane flew over and went around in a circle, flew over again. Nothing happened. And by this time, they're terrified, but they're totally confused. And the third time the plane flew over, the pilot dipped his wings and then flew off. And they survived and rescued the soldiers. And it's an incredible story. And he shared that with us. Okay, this is a picture of the soldiers. This is Ron Cholet. We're at the train tracks. And by the way, while we were there at the ceremony, and the ceremony consisted of, we had all done our speeches in the building that I showed you earlier. But at the site of the memorial, the soldiers spoke. The chaplain read spoke and read a speech, and there was rabbi there who said Kaddish. We all said Kaddish, and it was just amazing. It was unbelievable. So this is a picture of him. Okay, and this is the U.S. 30th Infantry. This is their symbol. And by the way, they also have this on, I have a pin. When we went to the reunion in Charleston and later at the symposium, Frank Towers gave each one of the survivors a pin with the 30th Infantry logo on it, which every member of the 30th has. And the survivors were made honorary members of the 30th Infantry Division. And I have that pin. I gave one, I actually have two because Paul got one in Charleston and another one when we went to the symposium at Hudson Falls. And he wore that, he put that pin on his jacket. He wore it everywhere. it was one of the proudest moments of his life. And I have the pin, and it's just been an amazing, amazing experience. I have this slide now with websites you can go to, and I'll leave this up while we take questions. This is a video that was made by the Holocaust Museum, the National Memorial Holocaust Museum in Washington, a wonderful video of the reunion in Hudson Falls. It's about a 7-8 minute video. This is my website. This is the website with the a video that was made of the memorial so that you can watch it and see the speeches and see the soldiers and see the actual events at the memorial. Ron Chalet's website has all the speeches on it that everybody gave. Oh, sorry, this is the video of the memorial service on YouTube. This is the a video. I forgot to tell you that Matt Roselle, the teacher, is making a documentary, a PBS documentary about the story of the train and all the events, subsequent events. And this is the video that he made of the April 30th. Okay, whoops. Okay, all right, see you. Okay, Gail. Anyway, can we keep that one? Okay, where's my, I just want to keep that one, this one up. How do I? Okay, so if people want to write down any of these websites. And Gail, are there questions?
Just a reminder, people can put questions in the chat, but I also want to acknowledge, because I forgot to mention this, Rona, that we do want to acknowledge the financial assistance of the Canada Council through the Writers Union of Canada and how they've supported tonight's program on your behalf. So thank you so much. I didn't know all this about you, and you've taken on your husband's story as if it's your own. And I'm amazed by that. Now, I have a question about the photo, the famous photo. You said that's number 3 with the woman. So this was 1945 and they were coming out of Bergen Belsen. And I have to say, I was a little bit surprised to see them dressed nicely and not in like a uniform of a concentration camp. And they actually looked not so.
Oh, okay. One thing that I discovered when I was doing my research for the book, that I know that Paul, there was a lot of not everyone on the train was Hungarian, but there was a special part of the train, of the camp, called the Hungarian camp. And I'll just briefly tell you this story because it's also quite fascinating. I'm having a senior moment. When Eichmann came into Hungary, when the Germans invaded Hungary in March of 1944, they knew they were losing the war at that point, but they were determined that they were going to kill as many Jews as they could in the time they had left, and they did that. But Eichmann made a deal, and I'm sure most of you heard of Kastner's train. Kastner was a wealthy Hungarian Jew who made a deal with Eichmann to rescue about 1,000 Jews on a train into Switzerland. There was a lot of controversy about this because these people paid a lot of money to get on this train. Now, there were people on the train who did not have a lot of money, but the majority of them were people who I believe paid like the equivalent of $1,000 person to get their families, and that train went to Switzerland. Kastner was later put on trial in Israel I forget the exact charges for selling out his own people or whatever. He was found not guilty, but he was then assassinated in Israel. But another part of this deal that he made with Eichmann was called Jews on Ice. And what that was is that he arranged to take approximately 3,000, mostly women and children and a few older men, and, quote, put them on ice. In other words, instead of sending them to Auschwitz, these people were sent into Austria to work as slave laborers. Some of them, a lot of them went into factories in the area around Vienna. Some of Paul's friends were in those factories, and they stayed in the factories for the duration of the war, and I believe they pretty much all survived. Paul and his family and some of the others were sent to work on farms. And so from April until November, they were on a farm doing labor on the farm, and things weren't that awful. I mean, they were slave laborers, but they slept in the barn on straw. They had food. They were able to take some food with them when they went into Bergen Belsen. I never understood. Paul always told me that when they left the farm and they were sent to Bergen Belsen, the farmers who were not Nazis, they were under the Nazi thumb themselves, gave each of the laborers a jug of molasses syrup. This was a sugar beet farm. They grew sugar beets and they made molasses from it. And they gave each of them a jug of molasses to take with them. Now, I was an interviewer for the Shoah, the survivors of the Shoah. And I remember that people told me the first thing that happened, they got to the camps, everything was taken from them. So I never understood why Paul and his family were able to keep those molasses jugs, because his mother would dole it out to them every day, a spoonful here, a spoonful there. That helped keep them alive. And what I found out is that part of the deal that Kastner made with Eichmann was that when these Hungarian Jews got to Bergen Belsen, they were put in a separate part of the camp called the Hungarian camp. And they had special privileges. They didn't know it, but the privileges were they could keep their possessions. They were allowed to wear their own clothes. They didn't have to wear those uniforms. And one of the most important, the children could stay with the parent. So the families stayed together. And it was that staying together where they were able to help each other stay alive that really saved so many of their lives.
Wow, that's incredible. And your husband was 6.5 when he was liberated, and his memory of that traumatic time just stuck with him, but he never really spoke of it.
The woman whose picture I showed you, this Elizabeth Seaman, she was a couple of years older than Paul. I think she was about 8 when she was liberated. And I met her, and she was with us, in Farlesleben, but we met her at the Hudson Falls Symposium. And I remember one day we were sitting, maybe over lunch or something, and her and a few of the others, and they started comparing notes. And everything Paul had told us, everything he had done, because I did finally convince him to be interviewed, not by myself, but interviewed for the Shoah. Everything he said, he remembered. And it was just incredible. Leslie now the other thing I forgot to tell you, before the soldiers came, the train stopped. Their SS guards, because they were under the SS. The SS guards had set up machine guns and were preparing to shoot everyone. They hadn't driven the train off the bridge, so they were going to shoot everyone. When the 2 soldiers came out of the forest, the 3 with Major Benjamin, the guards dropped the guns and ran off. Leslie Meisels, who was 18 at the time, told that they had already taken the survivors out of the first passenger cars and lined them up. And Leslie remembered being lined up against the train with the in front of the machine guns when the soldiers dropped the guns and ran off. That's how close it was.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Rona,
So that's why they looked better, but I mean, they were very thin. They were starving. The first thing they did was run around. Paul said that he and a few of the other boys went and they found snails and they found matches in one of the in the end, you know, where the soldiers had dropped some matches, and they lit the matches and they cooked the snail, not kosher, but they didn't care at that point, and ate the snails. Many years later, when Paul was when we were here and Paul was designing, he had a client in Quebec and we were there, and this client took us to a very fancy French restaurant, ordered escargot. Thought Paul was going to have a heart attack.
Rona, was this your first time in Germany?
No, I was in Germany in 1967 when I was backpacking through Europe. And I was there with my friend Faye, whom I had met in Israel. She's the one who introduced me to Paul when we got home. And we went all through much of Germany. And we went through Checkpoint Charlie at the time when it was really Checkpoint Charlie. And we went through the whole thing where we had our passports taken and we had to wait. And, you know, it was a very scary thing, but it was a very interesting experience.
On this trip, did you encounter any anti-Semitism from the locals, or they were all welcoming and embracing their history?
Definitely in Berlin, yes, it's definitely in Magdeburg. When I was going to put some pictures from Berlin on my PowerPoint, but I figured it would just slow everything down. But the first thing I saw when I got to Berlin, I took the train from the airport to the hotel where I was meeting Sharon and Ron and Elizabeth. And our hotel was on the Friedrichstrasse. And as I exited the train station, the first thing I encountered was a bronze statue of children with suitcases. And there was a plaque that said, "Trains to life, trains to death." And the statue is two-sided. On one side, you have a whole group of children carrying suitcases. And the other side, you have just, I think, 2 or 3 also carrying suitcases. But the side where it says "Trains to life," this was the Friedrichstrasse station was the first station that the Kindertransport left from. So the Trains to Life were the children going on the Kindertransport, and the other side of the statue were the children going to being deported to Auschwitz and other camps. Very powerful station and statue. And if you're ever in Berlin, I'm sure a lot of people don't see this statue because it's really not on the beaten path unless you take a Jewish tour of some sort. But it is worth going to the Friedrichstrasse train station. It's an amazing statue. We found memorials everywhere, and we went to the Jewish Museum. And it's very interesting. I'm not going to go into details. I know so many of you have been in Germany, have been to Berlin and seen it. But if you do get to, I did not expect to love Berlin as much as I did, but we found memorials everywhere. And it was quite a wonderful experience. No, we didn't experience any anti-Semitism at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. My parents were born in Germany after the war, and they never had a desire to go back and support the Germans and give them any money. But
absolutely,
for my father's 70th birthday, they made the voyage because he was born in Bergen Belsen.
Oh.
So you wanted to see where he was born, and they said the same thing. Berlin was one of the most magnificent cities they've ever been to. So,
you know, it's brand new because Berlin was bombed to pieces, and everything is new. The buildings are gorgeous, but as a Jew walking through Berlin and seeing all these apologies for the Holocaust, I mean, there is an amazing memorial right near the Brandenburg Gate, which is just these blocks, stone blocks, and they're all different sizes. And as you walk through, they get narrow and you start to feel closed in. There's nothing written there. It's just to give you this feeling. It's incredible. It really is amazing. I'm really glad I went back. I'll just say, talk about Paul never wanted to go to Germany. He never wanted to step foot in Germany. And when we finally, 1989, we took that right after the wall fell, we took our kids to Hungary to visit his father and to see Hungary. But we flew to Zurich and we drove from Switzerland through Austria into Hungary. But we had to go through a part of about, I forget, 100 kilometers of Germany to get into Austria. And Paul just stopped when he looked at the map. This was before GPS. He said, I'm not driving through Germany. So he decided he wanted to go up into the mountains. I said, Paul, that's insane. It's going to be night. We're going to get lost. We'll probably go over a cliff. Just get in the back seat and go to sleep. Well, I drove that 100 clicks. I have never driven so fast in my life. I must have been going 160 kilometers an hour, but I got us through Germany. So no, he never, but I honestly believe he would have come to this. He would have come to this reunion for sure.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rona, for sharing this wonderful story about your family's history. And we have a comment here. Hi, it's Edith, Leslie Meisel's daughter.
Oh, Edith.
Did you see this message? Can you read it, Rona?
Oh, where is it? In the chat. Let me just go to the chat.
My sister Judy and my mom Eva are also on now listening, and Judy and I were with Rona and Carol Wash's daughters, Sharon and Elizabeth and Farlesleben for the ceremony in August. It truly was a remarkable event and one we will never forget. Oh, they just sent it to me personally.
Yeah, that's what I couldn't read it. Yeah, hi Edith, hi Eva and Judith. I'll tell you, all of us being there together, and I told you the coincidence how, Paul found out that Leslie and his family were on the train. I mean, there are so many coincidences in this story. I could probably keep you here all night, I mean, just one quick one. Kathy Lowinger, who was my editor on 2 of my books about 20 years ago, Kathy and I stayed in touch, and I was at her place a couple of summers ago in the backyard during COVID, and we were talking, and I'd forgotten she was born in Hungary, but her family left when she was just a baby. And so we started talking, and I said something about Germany, that I was going to go on this trip. And she says, my father was on the last train out of Bergen Belsen that went to Theresienstadt. I said, really? I said, how long was he in Theresienstadt? That must have been one of the 3 trains that left. Oh, I forgot to mention at the very beginning that I did mention that 3 trains left. I said, you must have been on one of the 3 trains. I said, how long was he in Theresienstadt? She said, no. He always told me he was liberated from the train. They didn't get to Theresienstadt. Bingo. I got his name. I sent it to the historians at Bergen Belsen. Sure enough, he was on the train. She put it on her Facebook page, gets a phone call from a very close friend of hers who says, Kathy, my father was in the 30th Infantry and he helped liberate that train.
Wow.
These coincidences keep happening and happening and happening.
Yes.
Yeah,
there's no such thing as coincidences.
Yeah, the story is not yet done.
Yeah. Thank you, Rona. Thank you for everyone for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. And anyone, if you have any questions, you've got my email, you can call me, you can, I'll be happy to talk to you.
I'll unmute people in case anybody wants to say.
I'm gonna close the
if I can figure out how to here.
Okay.
Okay, I unmuted. So if anybody wants to say anything, feel free. Say hello.
Some familiar faces. It's such a pleasure. Sharon, hi. Sharon's waiting.
Oh yes, Sharon. I see Sharon.
Elizabeth here too.
Hi.
Hi,
You did a
Sharon.
great job. It was fun to relive the memories.
It's been amazing. And Sharon, we always say the best thing that has come out of this are the wonderful friendships we've made.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
And hi to Edith and Eva, I think, are both on tonight. Yeah. So
we've been saying we need a Zoom, isn't it?
Yes, so thanks, Gail, for this reunion.
No problem.
Is Elizabeth here too?
I didn't see her
Okay,
on
she
it.
said
I
was
think she
gonna
was going to
but
try, but
Yeah,
you
she
know,
may have
her-
had something at school.
yeah.
So, yeah, no, it's just wonderful. It's been an amazing experience.
Wonderful, Sharon, your father and what he did.
And
Well, you know, he would just say he did what needed to be done. And, you know, his comment, of course, they're in combat and he says, what are we going to do with all these people? So, and he found out eventually you become friends with them.
Yeah, and I'm just even astonished that like they had a camera and they were taking pictures, like they had that presence of mind that they were documenting history.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, it was George that had the camera, right? But Major Benjamin took that other picture, the one with the woman, you know, with her arms out that we see. I know when I was in Israel and I was having dinner with friends of Paul's, I gave them a copy of the book and I showed them that picture, and Chaim said, oh yeah, he says, I know this picture. Every time there's some kind of event, they bring this picture out. It's a very famous picture. It's amazing.
And I think Major Benjamin did have his camera there to document it, because at that point they were trying to document everything that had happened so that we would have it today.
Yes. It was, yeah, they wanted pictures. I remember Frank Towers saying when we were at the reunion, he said, you know, that when they were going through Europe, they were getting, you know, from the Stars and Stripes and, you know, the radio stations and everything, they were getting reports of all these atrocities, which they thought were largely propaganda, because they couldn't believe that anyone could do the kinds of things that these Germans were reported as doing. He said, and then we found the train and we knew that everything we'd heard was true.
Wow.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the meeting now, but thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Thanks, Rona.
Thanks, Gail.
Thanks,
And
Ronnie.
bye to everyone.